Welcome to today's Politics and Tactics. We got a real special show for you today. And we're going to talk a little bit about Chris Pepler, his family, his son, what the brotherhood and sisterhood of the fire department really should be. And, it's with a heavy heart that we have this show. Chris Pepler was one of the original co hosts of this show. And every day, PJ and I just try to push his legacy a little bit forward. And, Chris's legacy lives in his son and his wife. And I'm going to turn the show over to PJ and Mark Ha, who's the man behind the curtain from The Wizard of Oz. We're going to ask him to come on with us because Mark Ha filmed the Tactical Perspective series, and Chris was the lead on Fire Attack for that series. So Mark got to spend a lot of time with Chris. And, if you're out there, whether it be with electric vehicles, whether it was his work in the union, whether it was his work as assistant chief. I remember in the union, he used to have boxes all ready for arbitration. Chris had a document for everything. And then he brought that same commitment when he went to management. He was always 100%. And when we filmed, he was a little nervous about everything sometimes, but it was kind of part of his charm because he was always so humble, but competent, knowledgeable. And once you put him on camera, it was like a light went off in his eyes. And this information that he bestowed on firefighters across the country will live on. And with that, I will turn it over to PJ. And I think that this will be a very informative show and show firefighters that, we do a good job in the initial honoring our dead. We often do a poor job on the recognizing the courage of those who live and carry on the legacy of firefighters. So we're going to hear about a fight today, and I'm going to turn this over to PJ and Lori Pepler. It's an honor to have you on the show, and thank you so much. Jason Emery, you exemplify what a brother firefighter should be, because I know you've been there from the very beginning of this. And, on behalf of the fire service, thank you, because you truly know what it means to be a brother firefighter. PJ, go ahead.
Thanks, Frank. And Lori, welcome. And Jason, welcome. I'll introduce both Lori and Jason in a second. Just want to say this is one of the more harder shows that we're going to have to do. And I'll tell everybody who Chris actually was. But first and foremost, he was a friend to all of us, and the husband to Lori, and father of his son, Nate. And that's probably more important than the bio that I'm going to actually read. The bio is our professional image, but what's more important is the personal image, kind of where we all live and where we sleep and who we live with and socialize with. And that's what Chris was more about to me. We never worked together. We did some stuff together, authored some articles together, worked on the DVD series together, but we didn't work together. We were friends, and friends first. And then the professional stuff kind of came on the side. So if everybody takes something out of today, just remember Chris was a friend first and a professional in the fire service second. So for those of you that don't know who Chris is, give you a brief overview, which it's almost impossible to do, to give something brief when we're talking about Chris. Then we'll give you a brief bio of Jason, and then we'll tell you what we're here for today. So Chris was an instructor of the Wolcott State Fire School, which is part of the National Fire Protection Association's Electrical Vehicle Safety Training Program. He was a subject matter expert for NFPA's Electric Vehicle Safety Training Program. He was a director of training for Emergency Training Solutions. He was part of the ETS team that produced the PowerPoint companion materials for Fire Engineering Handbook for both Fire 1 and Fire 2. He co-authored the Tactical Perspectives Fire Attack video series with Frank, and he contributed to the Ventilation Search Command and Calling the Mayday video series. He assisted the production of the John Norman DVD series, Strategy and Tactics, and he co-hosted this show, one of the original hosts with Frank, Politics and Tactics with Fire Engineering. He started in the fire service as a fire explorer, as some of us has from a young kid, and he achieved the rank of assistant chief in the city of Torrington. Chris passed away and left us on November 1st of 2017. Still seems like yesterday that, you can say that he left us, but I know for sure that he really hasn't left us. So that's a little bit about Jason, and you're going to hear a lot more about him today. Give you a brief introduction of Jason and why he's joining us, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of the show. So Jason is a 26-year plus veteran of the fire service. He's a captain for the Waterbury Fire Department, Waterbury, Connecticut Fire Department. He's lectured exclusively on alternative fuel vehicles. He's published numerous articles on that subject. He served as a subject matter expert for NFPA and the lead instructor for their alternative fuel vehicle safety training program. He was one of those guys that we probably should have listened to 10 years ago, at least. We wouldn't be scrambling in the last year or two with all the EV issues that we're currently having. He's a member of the SAE 2990 Task Force, Hybrid and EV First and Second Responder Task Force. He also instructed as part of the Chevy Volt training team for the first responders throughout the country. And Penwell selected Jason and ETS to be the lead developer for the PowerPoint companion materials for the Fire Engineering Handbook, both Fire 1 and 2. But even more importantly, besides all that, he was probably Chris's absolute best friend. And that's what this is all about, who Chris was. And the unfortunate fight that Lori, Chris's widow, actually had to dig in and fight the fight. And not too many people would fight the fight. And they say the firefighters that we're courageous and we're brave. But knowing what Lori just has been through, she's a lot more courageous than me and a lot braver than I am. So, Chris being an 18-year veteran and deputy chief of the Torrington Fire Department when he passed away, despite a medical certificate that Chris Pepler's cancer was caused by exposures he received during his work for over 18 years as a firefighter for the city in Torrington, the city refused to provide any survivor benefits to his family for the past 4 years. And this is a quote right from the complaint. The lawsuit filed in Waterbury Superior Court seeks a judgment finding that Chris Pepler's death was in the line of duty and that his spouse and son are eligible for death benefits and medical benefits under Connecticut General Statute and the pension plan. It also alleges a breach of fiduciary duty and a breach of contract. So what that basically says is Chris's cancer that he passed away on November 1st of 2017 was occupational cancer. But Lori and his son were not receiving the benefits they should have received. Many people would have just laid down and dealt with it. It is what it is and kind of figured out another way. Lori didn't do that. She stood strong, courageous, and brave, and she fought the fight, and she was successful. Lori, I know today has to be a little difficult for you to be here because Chris spent many, as you know, many days, many evenings, many nights on this show as original author, founding member of this show, the radio show, and doing stuff for fire engineering. So you're kind of sitting in his seat. And I'm pretty proud of you for that because I don't know if I would be able to do that. So welcome to the show. And we'll just kind of turn it over to you a little bit. We'd like to hear, for those that don't know about Jason, right? They don't know who he was. Tell us a little about Jason that you want everybody to know. Then we'll go over so sorry about Chris. Then we'll go over to Jason. We'll hear from Jason a little bit. I'm just a little nervous today, Frank. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you don't want me to tell you anything I know about Jason.
That might be more interesting, be more fun.
It'll be all go downhill from there, trust me.
Yeah. And then we'll go into the fight a little bit, what you had to fight for and why.
I'm sorry, I listening to you guys speak, I get a little emotional. I'm trying to keep it together, but everything you said was true. Chris loved this show and loved doing it with you guys. And when he got sick and he couldn't do it, it was one of the things. He missed his job, which he worked, all through his sickness, but he missed this side of it tremendously. It was hard for him to deal with not being able to participate because his cancer affected his speech, as you know. So. I don't know. I'm not sure where you want me to start. You guys were there from the beginning when he was diagnosed in 2015.
Yep. So, Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit, right? So you're obviously much closer to, Chris and Frank and I were, friends first and fire service second. I know you have a long history. You guys go way back. Maybe tell us a little about Chris, what you think the fire service should know for those listening today that didn't know Chris.
Yeah, so Chris and I actually met in high school. We were both volunteers in our separate towns, but so yes, our relationship goes back quite a few years. He was just passionate about the fire service, and he kind of demanded of everybody that was around him. Sometimes that was a good thing. Sometimes people weren't necessarily happy about that, but but he brought a lot to the table with it. I mean, the fire service, especially in our area, is better for it. I think, the content that he put out, the articles that he wrote, the videos that he worked on with you guys were all very important to him. And like you said before, Mark's got some good stories just working with him on the filming side of it. But his goal really was about education, and he wanted to make sure that next generation of firefighters were trained the right way.
Yeah. Frank, why don't you tell us a little bit of how you convinced Chris to be part of the Tactical Perspectives DVD series?
Chris, being past union, I think he was a union leader. I think he was union president at the time. He asked me straight out, and there's a life lesson in that. If you want anything in this life, you have to ask for it. And a lot of times, as Lori knows, you also have to fight for it. With this, all he had to do was ask, and I kind of opened the door, and he took a project that was good and made it great. So it was just phenomenal. And Chris was he was a founding member of the show, but he didn't like to do anything remote. And we started off as radio. So he would drive from Torrington an hour to my house, sit with my wife and I, talk, do the show, talk, and then drive an hour home when he could have just logged on by radio. He always liked to be kind of, that one-on-one. He was able to really connect with people and connect with students. So he was a great fire instructor, and I learned a lot from him watching him work in the Tactical Perspectives DVD. And he even rode with me a couple times in New Haven, and I'll never forget this. He comes to New Haven, and though we passed probably 30 supermarkets on the way down, he decided to go to the supermarket in Fairhaven to get ice cream before he came to the firehouse. And so he opens up the thing, and I worked in a Ecuadorian neighborhood, which is it's culturally different, and they were selling frozen guinea pigs. So he was debating, do I bring the frozen guinea pigs and the ice cream to the firehouse from the supermarket? But he rode with us. I mean, he loved the job, and whatever he did it 100%. And Lori, I'm sorry, because he had two great loves of his life. He had Lori and the fire service. And I know they were always competing because he didn't do anything halfway. He always had that smile. He always had that warmness to him, had the ability to draw people towards him. Why I kind of got the rough elbows. Chris just kind of lights up a room and would draw people into him. And I know how much he loved Lori and his son, Nathan. I remember we were taking pictures for the firefighter's handbook, and I'm like, I need a picture of somebody who fell out of a window. He's like, good, Nathan, lay in the bushes. or Nathan's laying in the bushes outside, so we take pictures.
Nathan got used in a few of those pictures.
The firefighter's handbook. So he really had those two loves. And, Lori, you've been sacrificing all along, because anybody who's married to a firefighter knows that it's tough, but he always kept you in his heart, always talked about you and his son. And it was just such an honor to start this show with Chris Pepler. It was great to see him teach at FDIC. And Chris Pepler and Jason Emery did two things that are very difficult to do. They made EV lectures actually interesting. I mean, you listen to these people. Jason's one of the most smartest people in the fire service that I've ever met, without a doubt. And Chris was right there with them. And PJ, right? 10 years ahead of the curve?
At least. Listen, from the academy perspective, we worked with Jason in a small group last year to put some documents together for training on EVs. And I said it then, I said it this morning, if we just listened to Jason and Chris at least 10 years ago, we would not have been struggling this past couple of years dealing with the situation that we're currently dealing with across the country. They were well ahead, telling us what we should be doing back then, and none of us listened to them. Electric vehicles. Who's going to have to deal with electric vehicles? We're not going to have that problem. They're never going to be here.
And nobody even cared about electric vehicles back then. Never mind electric vehicles and extrications and car fires. And these guys were teaching it right from the very beginning. Now everybody wants it. Everybody I meet now is an expert in EV vehicles, just so you know, Jason. So you're definitely diminishing in your
oh, absolutely. Which is fine by me.
It's like,
as long as the information's getting out there, that's all that matters.
Well, the problem is a lot of wrong information's getting out of there. And that's the one thing Chris Pepler and you always did, was made sure that the right information was getting out there. And if they didn't know the answer, they would research the living hell out of it to find it. So there was a fight here. So Lori, now when Chris passed, most firefighters think, well, all the politicians and everybody there is always shaking firefighters' hands, and they want to be in the pictures and they want to be quoted in the paper about the fire service. But there's kind of a darker side to this too, is that even though, and let me just take it back, a couple of years ago, it was extremely difficult, say 10 years ago, to get a doctor to connect the dots. Right. But now research and studies are coming in that we know that firefighters are exposed to carcinogenics in smoke, acrolein, hydrogen chloride, hydrogen cyanide. It's a chemical cocktail of methyl bad stuff. And then we also have forever chemicals in our gear, which is a commonality between every firefighter in America. You're always wearing your gear. So you have constant exposure from that and the products of combustion. I think it's a combination of the two. And all the politicians want to be there right when there's a photo op, but I think your experience was probably a little bit different. Can you kind of tell us kind of how this got started? Because as somebody who's been through a lawsuit before, it's taxing. And I know there's times where you feel completely alone, because when you step out front and you take on City Hall, you know, Lori's another example that you can beat City Hall. But the fact is, when you take that step out, even when you have people behind you saying they're supporting you, it definitely at times must felt like you were alone. So can you kind of take us, if you don't mind? I know it's kind of dark thing, but I think people have to understand that it's never easy. It's never what you think, because people hear the end result and they don't realize the road it took to get there.
Well, Frank, I think you sort of hit something that was important. In the first few months after Chris passed, I went with the mayor, who Chris had always had a good working relationship with. Actually, I went with Jason's wife, who's one of my best friends. And she, you know, typical politician, spoke a good game. Oh yeah, we're going to do whatever. We're going to do what's right. You know, we support our firefighters, all of that, you know, something I think, like you said, that firefighters here, and there's a photo opportunity. And then, you know, from there, it quickly deteriorated when they, you know, when I simply became a dollar sign to them. And they realized what was deserved for Chris and for Nathan, for my son, when they realized that, like I said, that you feel diminished to a dollar sign, because Chris knew that his cancer was caused by his job. He was perfectly healthy until his diagnosis. He had physicals every year that were done by the city as a part of employment. He had none of the risk factors, wasn't a smoker, not a big drinker, you know, those types of things. And then it quickly, in the months thereafter, became a fight. You know, COVID definitely slowed it down, but it will be 6 years that he's gone this November. And we just settled about a month ago. And there were, you know, times when we thought, all right, like you said, you know, is this worth it? I was lucky in a lot of ways. And it's a weird thing to say that, but I was lucky because 6 years ago, there was even less research about the carcinogenic nature of firefighting, or at least there were more people willing to object to it. But when I say I was lucky because I had a family and friends that said, no, this fight is the right one. You know, Chris would have wanted me to do it. One of the things he had said to me beforehand is, he said, make sure you get my full pension. You know, do what you have to. And he tried to put a number of things in place before filing paperwork, you know, with workers' comp, those types of things when he was out of work. And even with that, it was a fight. But because I had support from my family, my mother, my father was still alive at the time, my sister and brother and their families. And one of my lawyers, whose wife is one of my best friends, thankfully were, you know, a great support system. I was able to do some things that the average person may not be able to do. for example, I hired Dr. Kenneth Spaeth. He's out of New York. Some firefighters know the name because he defended the 9/11 firemen after 9/11. And he wrote me a report. And I know this is silly, but I wanted to show visuals. This report, I commissioned him to write. And he finished it 2020. And then in this last year, when the fight was still going on, he wrote an updated one. And there was even more evidence in just a couple of years that proved what we all know, that firefighting is carcinogenic and it is a risk. So I was lucky because that was costly, and I had support of, like I said, my family, emotional and financial. And when I think now that even though, Connecticut passed, the Senate bill 5857, that it's presumptive care, that doesn't mean they're not going to fight you. And I was lucky that I was able to continue to fight even after I knew it was going to be a battle. You want to see visuals. Chris's battle. See this? This is 1, 2. These are medical records for 2 years, just to give people a visual about why it's so important to get your yearly physical, to, when your wife tells you you need to have something checked out, or, make sure for example, Chris's cancer was found by his dentist. Make sure you go to have these annual things. Anytime you're at an incident where there's exposure, make sure you're filling out that paperwork. It's crucial. I was lucky that Chris, was, like you guys are saying, ahead of the curve in a lot of ways. And so, I had things in place, but even with that, 6 years, it was a fight. They did not want to pay anything. So, yeah.
And part of that fight, and I had this conversation with Jason, and he brought this to my attention, is that Chris was fighting this fight even before he was diagnosed. Right? Jason, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, from the union side of things, and then even after he went to the deputy chief slot within the department, he was working on instituting procedures, but he also stayed pretty active at the state level with the legislature, working towards securing benefits for any Connecticut firefighters that were diagnosed with cancer. And this was at least probably 2-3 years before he was diagnosed, if I remember correctly. So
yes, he worked with one of our representatives in Torrington, and he testified to get the bill passed that was replacement wages for firefighters when they were going through treatment and all of that. So he was definitely ahead of the curve. And in February of 2015, when he first noticed that something was wrong, he was working on that with the legislator and testifying in Hartford. And then, ironically, just a couple of months later, he was diagnosed.
Lori, because Chris was very politically active in Torrington as well, not only from a union perspective, but also management perspective. After the lawsuit was filed, did any politicians come up and support the suit, or everybody disappeared?
The first couple of years, I had many that privately supported me. Nobody publicly. Connecticut would have been at that point, I don't want to say ahead of the curve, because there are plenty of states that had before, when this started, had presumptive care. But publicly, no. Privately, they'd talk a good game. It was pretty clear right from the start that I was going to be on my own as far as fighting this. Became, in town political. That, the mayor was of a particular party, and everybody in her party definitely, stayed away. I got support from like I said, privately from others, but there was nobody who was willing publicly to do anything.
And it almost seems like with the municipalities in the state, as if they want the courts to make the decision, because it's not inexpensive to protect your firefighters that way, and I think that's sort of the natural reaction, is to just let somebody else decide, and then you can go, well, we had to do this because that's what we ordered to do, and I think that's the tough part. And I think that's what a lot of states are going through now, and a lot of cities are going through.
Right. And it's unfortunate because I think all of them know what the right thing to do is, but they won't do it because, taxpayers will see it costs money or whatever. My question, even to this day, to the city, is how much money did they spend fighting me for 6 years? I know how much I had to spend. And they didn't go with their corporation counsel that's on the payroll for the city of Torrington. They hired an outside firm to fight me. As a taxpayer, I'd love to know, well, how much did you spend to fight me? On something that, in my mind, when I read the reports that I had written and all of that, I don't know how you can argue that his job was the reason why he developed cancer.
Well, seeing those binders behind you that you held up, Chris would be so proud of you, because I remember he had that. He was like the first one I know that didn't just get a briefcase. He got the rolling cart. It was like a thing from Staples where you rolled your documents when you went into a meeting. And so he would be very.
He loved a good binder and a notebook. Nathan actually the other day needed an extra one for school. I still think I have a closet full, of just binders and stuff like that. And this one, he would definitely be impressed. I think you're right.
And one thing that you should be commended for, that our listeners need to know, is that just because somebody's a lawyer doesn't mean that they're good at the area of law that you need help in. So it's just like a doctor. You don't go to a foot doctor for brain surgery. So, I've seen firefighters where, I'm going to hire somebody's brother-in-law or a real estate attorney because they're a lawyer. You want to get somebody who has some experience in the area that you're dealing with. And it's clear that the experts that you're able to bring in, really made a difference. If you're going to fight, you want to fight. I mean, Chris loved the quote from the Untouchables, you don't bring a knife to a gunfight. I think he even says it in one of the DVDs
He does.
of the fire attack DVDs. So he would be so proud that not only you fought, but you kept the perseverance and, went through not only the emotional trauma of dealing with Chris's sickness and death, but the emotional trauma of reliving it every day when you're trying to battle a lawsuit. A lot of people think that you file a lawsuit and you're kind of out of it and it's just the lawyers. No, it's an absolute nightmare. And it's even more a nightmare when you got to go home and look at your son and, hey, I'm fighting for what dad wanted. And, he's got to be beaming because you carried the day, won the day, and you're an example to, everybody out there that, just because you're entitled to it doesn't mean that you're not going to have to fight to get it. And I think that that's the lesson, because a lot of people just bury their head in the sand, think that somebody else is going to do it. Somebody else is going to take care of it. No, a lot of times it comes down to you. And, Lori, unbelievable that you were able to step up. I also want to correct the record if I can, and maybe I'm wrong, but Jason, you're a battalion chief, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
that's okay. PJ was going off a little bit.
So he was he was telling me earlier when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor, and I was like, oh, he's on a roll.
So Frank, I asked him, is this bio? He goes, yeah, pretty much. Go with it. So, all right.
So, but I just want to let you know something that's very important.
Is what I actually said.
Even when we give you the promotion to battalion chief that you earned, Chris Pepler still outranked you.
Just yeah. There were definitely
Jason, you guys have to figure out who runs that ETS website, and maybe you could get the appropriate information up on there.
But Frank, to your point about the attorneys, and perfect case in point was Lori started out with one particular attorney who got the ball rolling, and then they sought out another firm that had a greater level of experience in that area. So to your point, yeah, you have to make sure that you're utilizing the appropriate legal representation.
Right. And one actually workers' comp lawyer that I started with that we dismissed into the case. The first time I sat down with him, and again, Jason's wife was with me at this meeting too, they said to me, "Oh, you definitely have a case." I'm like, "Great." They said, "But you have to find experts who will, give their medical advice that support this." And the message was you, meaning I would have to go out and find it. So I was fortunate that my attorney, he did a search across the United States for the top experts in occupational health and, risk in those types of things. And he was able to find Dr. Spaeth, who wrote it for me. And as Jason said, after we continued to fight for about 3 years, my attorney decided, he said, "All right, this is clearly, beating a dead horse." So we hired another firm with trial experience when it was clear that this was going to potentially go the full distance. And so we hired them, and they also had their own workers' comp attorney who had more expertise. And it's worth noting, without getting into numbers, the trend in Connecticut was definitely, as the years went on, and COVID, it was terrible. But in the long run, the fact that it took 6 years only helped my case, because every month that went by, and I'm preaching to the choir here, that more research came out to prove my case. So the longer they fought me, the more evidence I had. And we were prepared. And, you talk about, it's not just you hire an attorney and you sit back and let them do the work. I was going in, we were preparing testimony, pulling up records and Chris, all the work that he did, the fires that he was exposed to. It was a lot of work. It's not just, like you said, Frank, it's not just hire the attorney and I'll see you at court or whatever. You have to be an active participant in it if you are really, you want the outcome that you're hoping for. You really, it does. It takes a toll. And I've joked with a few people. They've asked me since, we finally settled, how do you feel? And it's been over a month now, and I still don't know how to answer that. Because for 6 years, I had all this energy, anger, I'm not sure what it is, that I devoted to this case. That now I'm not sure, I just have to find another outlet. And, that's something I'll have to deal with. But it does, it takes a lot out of you. And Nathan and I talked about it a lot. I'd say, okay, I'm going to the attorneys again today. He's older now, but initially he just wanted I just give him a little bit of information, because I think, it was so upsetting to him. But, we would talk about it. I'd say, this is because Daddy died for the city and they owe this to you and I. And, he understood that and obviously supported it. And, as he gets older, I think he'll understand really, how important this fight was.
Lori, when you were initially gathering information, did you solely just utilize the court system through subpoenas and depositions, or did you start off utilizing the Freedom of Information Act in Connecticut? Or for our listeners that are elsewhere, some states don't have a Freedom of Information Act. They'll have a sunshine law. But essentially, regardless of what they call it, wherever you are, did you use any of the public records acts in Connecticut to get any of the ball rolling?
Initially we didn't, because initially the city was, I say, talking to our lawyers, and they were talking a good game. And then it was just, nothing happens quickly. And then, of course, COVID slowed everything down. So initially we didn't. And when we transitioned to hiring a big firm, then they utilized all those tools to gather data when it looked as if we were headed towards a trial.
And did this, if you don't mind me asking, did this settle close to a trial date?
Yes, the judge had given them their last sort of whatever, for lack of a better word, warning. They said, okay, at the next hearing, I want to know progress, but you have until the next hearing, and if not, then we're moving forward. We'll set trial dates and all of that. So it really was in the 11th hour. And even after we technically came to an agreement in February, we went to a second mediation. Even after all that, between February and August, I still had to fight for what we agreed to in mediation, because there was language that I agreed to the deal that the city was giving me the runaround on. So even after, we walk away and I feel in February 24th, leave and feel like, okay, we have a deal. Still, another 6 months, they had to battle everything. So, nothing was easy.
Well, I think too, you talk about documentation, all the stuff Lori had to put together. And obviously when we all got into the fire service a number of years ago, we'll leave it at that, that wasn't a big thing, right? So we didn't track that. We didn't collect that information. So, two parts. Obviously, the prevention and reduction side of this is something that certainly has gained traction over the last few years. It was something that Chris was very passionate about, but again, we came up in the fire service era when you didn't wash your gear, you didn't clean your helmet, you didn't do any of that stuff. We didn't track what fires we went to. We didn't track what chemicals we were exposed to, because it wasn't something you did.
We were all wearing our gear all the time.
Right.
Yeah, to everything. Yeah, and it wasn't. It was just the way things were. So I think there's several aspects of it that there's some valuable lessons. Now, one, definitely the conversation about cleaning your gear after every fire and having a spare set of gear and rotating through and doing all of those things, very important. And certainly important for the reduction and the potential for developing some type of cancer. But that documentation is key, right? So you go over a course of a 30-year career. Say you started out 6 months ago, and you plan to spend the next 30 years in the fire service. Well, if that's the case, these are things that should be documented regularly, because it reduces that effort down the road if, God forbid, something happens, and now you got to go back and try to figure out every structure fire you responded to, every hazmat you went to, any of those types of incidents. So,
what was interesting about why we were able to do that easier, and you three all knew Chris well enough to know that he had pictures of every fire he was at. He kept, you said talk about notebooks. I had notebooks that he kept of fires that he was at. So when it came time and it looked like we were going to trial, the city had to provide to us a list of all calls that went out that he was at. And the record keeping was not great, but I could verify and be like, oh no, he was at this fire, and look, I have this picture. Now, yeah, it might have been like old school camera that we had to get developed, but we had that. There were people
dating us, Lori.
Right, I know. There were notebooks. So I'd say, he mentioned this fire on this date. So again, you joked before about those notebooks, but those types of things that he had kept, I was able to use and say to the attorneys, okay, I know for certain he was at these fires. For example, the big Tosi Brothers fire, the tire fire in town, he was on his way to Boston, but he came back and he was there for the bulk of the day. And, they were trying to say because he wasn't on the initial run report that he wasn't there. And I said, oh no, he was there. And I have an interview with the news that he gave there. So yeah, record keeping, I in that regard, I was able to, pull up this stuff. But again, then you have to be able to go back and do all the research and say to the fire, what might have been exposed to. There was a number of foam fires in Connecticut. We have in Torrington, we have a mattress factory that he responded to a number of times. We had to dig up the records of when they got the washing machines in the firehouse, when they put the ventilation system for the diesel fumes in their firehouse. So that all took work, but we did it. And, like I said, hopefully in the future for other people, the fight won't have to be so comprehensive that you'll need the amount that we were able to pull together, but we did it.
And for those firefighters that are listening today that are, understanding of that, I should track this, and you may be looking for a resource. So NFIRS is a new program that has the firefighter exposure tracking app that can track every incident that you go to, what you've been exposed to, and you have access to that long after you retire. Or if you're a retired firefighter, you can start using the app and backdating information into there. So it's a grant funded app. IPSDI is the data source, and it's going to process where it's actually should be linked with what we know as NFIRS. NFIRS is going away, and N4s is going to be the new data tracking software that we all use in the fire service, and they're going to have that app. That app is actually available now for you to start utilizing. And you could go back to many of the shows that Frank and I have had over the last couple of years that we've talked about prevention. We've had Diane Cotter out of Boston on our show numerous times, and Grant Peasley, and talking about the PFAOs and what we can do about reducing our exposure. In this career, we're going to be exposed. There's no way around it, right? It's the nature of the business. It's currently the nature of all of our PPE that we use every day. So you just have to look for ways to reduce that. Maybe not wear your gear just going to the store to get your meal or going for a public service call. Wear your structural firefighting gear to structural fires, not everything else. Wash your hands after runs, shower within the hour, decon your gear. Some of the things that Jason mentioned, having dirty gear was a badge. It was a badge of honor to have a dirty helmet and dirty gear. I think FDNY came out with it that clean is the new dirty. And they have, we're making a lot of great progress there, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And because of Chris's courage in fighting this fight, even long before that, he was diagnosed, and Lori, for what you've done, and I know that you're looking at this, that you fought for yourself and you fought for Nathan, you fought for what was right, but for what's right, you fought for the fire service, right? Because there are other firefighters and there's other widows and there's other families across this country that are going to look at this case, right? And that this goes into case law, and they will benefit from this in their fight as well. So, I've been lucky so far, and my wife hasn't been that lucky. We're not all, we're all exposed. We have that chance. And if I can, are diagnosed with cancer, people like you that stood this fight up will help me and every other firefighter across this country.
Thank you. And I just, stress to firemen listening that it's imperative that you do things like get your physical every year. Do those simple things like washing your gear. I mean, Chris was actually ahead of the curve. He didn't wash, that helmet. She had a name, but the gear, I laugh because we used to argue about it, be like, why is your wet gear hanging all over my kitchen? Or, whatever it is, because he would have to take it to the laundromat himself when the department didn't have the means to do it. And I hope that most departments now would have the means that you come back from a call and you can throw your gear in. I know it's expensive to have a backup set of gear, but really stress if you can't do it while you're on shift, as soon as you come off shift, and if you've been exposed, make sure you clean that gear. You just got to do whatever you can to reduce the risk. And as I said, Chris was diagnosed. He found his dentist. So you can't even it's your physical, but it's also doing those yearly checkups that are so important to just hopefully stay ahead of any potential risk.
I would think that three of us on this call with you have all been yelled at by our wives to go get something checked or to make an appointment.
Right.
And, I just had some skin stuff taken off, and if it was up to me, I wouldn't have done it. I just got tired of Trish saying, make the appointment or I'm going to make it for you,
Yeah.
And you're right. We should listen to our wives and significant others because they're usually looking out for our best interest.
Right.
And Lori said it best, regardless of the expense is, what's the expense if the firefighter gets burned? Every firefighter in America, I say this as a conservative, every firefighter in America should have 2 sets of gear, because wet gear lacks thermal stability and you got a chance to increase burns if you go from one fire to the next. So every firefighter in America should have 2 sets of gear, because as we move to decon, we're now getting gear wet on purpose, where years ago it was do everything you can to stay dry. So now we're getting gear wet on purpose. You should be able to change, take a shower before the company gets in service, make sure all your tools are clean, and put your gear in the washer and get a new dry set of gear. Jason, does Waterbury have 2 sets of gear?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, New Haven, we were fighting for it and we haven't got it. They haven't got it yet, but I think that they need to. I always thought it was funny is that a lot of, especially cities, will take the old gear and they'll send it to another country before it even hits their life thing. It's like, give it to a firefighter so they'll have a second set of gear. But that's definitely something that we should work through. Is Mark Ha with us? Mark, can you pop on for a second?
Oh,
Sure.
Is. So how's it going?
Good. Mark was the inspiration in the lead on Tactical Perspectives DVDs. And, while you can't get the DVD anymore, there are still streaming on the Fire Academy. And what people don't know is, with Chris Pepler's help and Mark's help, is that footage, we were like the first ones to put a camera in a fire. Before, now it's like commonplace. But back then it was, Mark had, here, I got this GoPro. And then we would bring it out all melted. He'd be like, what are you doing? But so Mark
gave him a heart attack a few times.
Yeah, Mark would have a heart attack working with us, but Mark got to go into fires with us and put together those DVDs and work with Chris directly. So Mark, we'd kind of like to hear your perspective on this, because this is it's great that Lori won and she's getting what she deserves. It's so sad she had to fight for it, but it's such a sad thing. Even in victory, it's like, I shouldn't even have to go through these 6 years. So kind of lift us up a little bit here.
Yeah. No, I'm so glad, Lori, that you won. But when I was thinking about Chris, as you guys were talking and telling stories, the thing that I obviously I didn't know him nearly as well as all of you, but the thing that always struck me was the joy that the man had. I mean, it was like, you could literally be like, okay, we're going to, we just burned this building down. Now we got to like drag it halfway. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a something crazy and be like, great. And it was just the joy for everything that he seemed to encounter. It was infectious. And you, I don't know, you wanted, I don't know, he made you want to do a little better, and he was deceptively like super smart. Like he was such like this folksy like guy, like, hey, whatever. And he'd say something like, oh, I don't know. I miss him so much, and I barely knew the guy. And I'm sure, I was fortunate to work with him for a few years and loved every minute of him. And I can't even imagine the hole that he's put in your lives. And I think it's really amazing that the fight that you have fought, so hopefully that hole doesn't happen to someone else down in the future. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
On that respect, I feel bad for Jason Emery, because Chris was like the fun half of Jason's personality. and I say that as a compliment, because Jason is always so stoic and smart, and Chris softened Jason wherever Jason was and lit up the room and made Jason palpable to everybody else there. So it's got to be tough for you, Jason.
Well, yeah, because I'm waiting for Lori to injure me now. Now she has nothing to focus on. I'm going to say something stupid, and she's just going to,
PJ, words of wisdom?
I don't know, Frank. This is one of those shows that, I went to bed last night and stared at the ceiling, actually worried about the show and how it was going to go, because Chris meant so much to all of us. And I'm sure this has been on Lori's mind for many weeks since we actually originally proposed the idea to her. and we could spend 5 hours telling stories about Chris and who he was and what kind of friend he was to all of us. And that still wouldn't do it justice, because he was just that guy. He was that guy that, when he was sick and, Lori mentioned that he couldn't, he affected his speech. We'd spend hours in the evening texting each other. And I like to go to bed early. I'm a guy that, my wife always gives me a hard time. And I'd be up on the couch trying to stay awake and text. It always seemed like, I don't know if that's when he got his energy or if he was just.
He was a night person.
Yeah. And sometimes Trish would she goes, well, just tell him you got to go to bed. I'm like,
no,
I can't. I'll never hear the end of it. It's just worth it to stay up a little bit longer and have this conversation.
You should text him in the morning, because he definitely was not a morning person.
No. Yeah, that's why I tell my son he comes by it naturally.
He got that honestly.
Yeah. I'll give you some words of wisdom. Frank, you said this at the beginning about brotherhood. One thing I've learned in these 6 years, and hopefully I can get through saying this, is I've always understood it. Any wife of a fireman knows what it means, but I know it on a different level. Jason, yes, his wife is one of my best friends, and I've known her since I was 4, but the 4 of us were always close, and that hasn't changed since Chris's passing. I joked at the beginning, Jason was here yesterday. I'm having a contractor come over. He looks out for me. That's brother. That's a brother. 2 of Chris's other best friends. One of them takes care of the yard. I never asked him, but he does that. Another one of his best friends has always, done things, taken Nathan skiing. That's brotherhood. You can't, I've learned it in a different way. And I know there are plenty of wives who, while you're in it, are like, oh, for God's sake, another call at the fire department, or this, or you got to talk, you joke about talking to you, texting you all night.
Don't forget the t-shirts, Laura.
Right. But this is something else that I've learned about, true brothers and friends through all of this, and their support has been unwavering.
And that's the one thing that I've always given Jason a lot of credit for. I think every time I talk to you, I thank you for, I think I even bought you dinner once because of it.
Never happened.
But no,
I don't ever remember you buying.
Jason really exemplifies, I'm always hearing, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. So, people want to do things and then life happens and it's just craziness. But Jason, you really did step up and others stepped up. And, it's just, Thomas Jefferson's last letter to Madison was, take care of me when I'm dead. And I think that Chris knew, especially at the end, when he really couldn't talk too much, like when we would, but yet he'd be in his office. I went and visited him in his office. He could hardly talk. And I think it might have been PJ, because I had to get somebody to interpret what he was saying, because I had trouble understanding him. But PJ could understand him and Jason could understand him. And, he never really had to say anything because he knew that he would be taken care of. And I think that's directly because of his relationship with Jason. And I think he knew that his wife was stronger than he even thought she was, because we always talk to firefighters. It's very often.
Let's back up. Lori was tougher than Chris anyway. So.
No, we knew that Lori was tougher than Chris. I'm saying this is a different type of. I'll find you a firefighter any day that will cut a hole on a weekend roof, will crawl down the hottest hall in blinding heat where it's putting you through the floor. And then when it comes to taking on City Hall, they're cowards. So then they're sheep. So the toughest people I know are sheep. Chris knew that Lori was always tough, but now she's strong. And he would be so proud of her binders, her tenacity, her persistence, and he'd be so proud that she got through all the time, even with Jason and the family support system, those times where you did feel alone. And the time, I know, I don't even have to ask you, the times where you're like, is this even worth it? Where you just want to turn the page and move on. And yet it goes to show you that if you're going to do anything great in life, it's going to be hard. You got to fight for it. And this is there's no doubt in anybody on this call's mind, anybody who even knew Chris, that he would want this fight, because he was fighting it before it even started. He was always advocating for firefighters. And he knew an important lesson, and that is that public safety should transcend politics.
Right.
And always do your homework, always get the data, and you can make the emotional argument first, but then you got to transfer to standards and statistics and your facts. And that's where Chris would drive it home. So, Lori, my hat is off to you. What do you call it? I know he loved you more than anybody in the world. I mean, he gave Jason personality. And I miss it.
This is what
Who
you're
could
hanging
do
around
that?
here, Frank?
Who could do that? But I miss him, and I really appreciate Jason. If you don't want to answer this, I completely understand, and it's okay to just say no. But can you tell us like how Nathan's doing, because that was Chris's other focus, and I think that'd be kind of a good way to segue off, and then we'll go around the horn.
He's doing well. He loves school. He's about 6, maybe 7 inches taller than me. He would be taller than Chris now. And I often think, oh, how would that, I want to know, what would that have been like? Chris would be jealous of his hair. He has big full head of hair. He's definitely got my hair. But he's doing well. He's still, we talk about Chris. I do a lot of the talking, and Nathan does a lot of the, agreeing and shaking his head, because it's still tough for him. He's only, he's 15, he'll be 16. And I think as he ages, he'll come to a point where it's easier for him to talk about it. When I'm with Jason and his wife, we talk about him. We keep him alive as much as we can. When he rolls his eyes at me, and when I see him in the morning, I know Chris is there with us because it's like talking to him. So he's doing all right. Like I said,
hopefully he's going to get your driving skills and not Chris when he turns 16.
Oh yeah, we started. We started driving. So, but he's doing well, and like I said, every once in a while he'll tell me, like as recently as a couple of months ago, we joked about cars, speaking of driving, and he said, oh, I remember that car. We were talking about this car that I had that I loved. And he said, yeah, he said, remember that night Daddy took me and we went wherever? He said, we got pulled over on Route 8. He told me not to tell you. And I'm like, okay, that's about right. But yeah, so he's doing well. And like I said, having Chris's best friends around makes a difference.
Absolutely. Jason, last words of wisdom?
No, I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about Chris, and like you said, doesn't even scratch the surface. I think, there's 2 points to Lori winning this. I think you would have been very happy about. Number one, obviously his family's taken care of, but number two, that wider group of fire service family now has some more historical data to go off of when it comes to pursuing their cases potentially. So,
PJ,
yeah, we've talked about, Lori, you talked about the brotherhood and what you've received from that, but don't forget that you've already given that back, right? By proceeding and fighting this fight, you have given that back more than what you have received, because you have now impacted and helped protect families of firefighters across the country.
Thank
and
you.
On a personal note, what nobody on this call knows except the two of us is that when my wife was diagnosed with cancer, one of the first people that reached out, and I don't even think you ever met Trish at that point, right? You reached out and you helped her through that. So you have not only been a receiver of the brotherhood and the sisterhood, you've given back, right? So don't ever think at some point that you've just taken. You've paid it forward many times over. You've paid it forward more than some actual real firefighters who ride in the back seat today have. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing today. This wasn't been easy for any one of us, and I can't imagine how difficult it is for you. But it's another way to show your courage and your bravery to pay it forward. So thank you.
Thanks, PJ.
And thanks for sharing Chris with us. I'm sure there's been plenty of times that, he said hey, you could have said, why don't we do this? But you didn't, right? You shared him with us nonstop. And we owe that thanks to you, because I got a lot out of it from him. And a lot of that's related to you allowing him to do that, because we're all married. We know how that works. We won't admit it, but we know it works.
Well, thanks to everybody, our
Yeah.
viewers out there. That's it for Politics and Tactics today. Again, thanks for Lori's courage. Jason Emery, you're a great man, and you'll be out at FDIC this year teaching EV. And there's a lot of pop-up experts out there. You're the real deal. You were there before it was cool. It's important if you're at FDIC and you want to learn about EVs and batteries and lithium and all that other fun stuff. Stop in and see Jason Emery and PJ Norwood. And Lori, all the best to you. And thank you so much for putting a face to this important issue and fighting the good fight. Chris would be proud. Mark from behind the scenes, thank you very much. You can take us off.
Thank you.